Hello, hello. Welcome to the Five Talents Podcast. I'm your host, Abel Pacheco. I interview the top commercial real estate investors and industry experts so you can learn from their experiences. So if you're an investor, a high W-2 earner, or real estate or tech sales professional that wants to invest in real estate without having to manage properties or leave your day job, then this podcast is for you. Or if you're already investing in real estate, but you're doing it part-time and you want to become a full-time multifamily or full-time commercial real estate investor, this podcast is for you too. You're going to learn a ton. You will learn from real-life multifamily investors and other professionals in the industry. They're going to share their blueprints for success, and I'm super excited that you're here. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, hello. Abel Pacheco here, your host for the Five Talents Podcast. We are super excited today. We have an amazing guest, another one. I say that almost every time if you've listened to enough of my shows, but literally every single time there's amazing guests. And Anthony's one of those. Mr. Anthony Pinto. Anthony, thanks for joining us, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Abel.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time, effort, energy, and service. So if you don't know, yes, sir. If you don't know Anthony, he's an active duty submarine officer for 6 years. And, we just wanted to say thank you for your service before we get started, my friend.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, yeah, Anthony's the co-founder of Mission First Capital. It's a real estate fund for non-accredited and accredited military investors. In his background, while serving in the military, he was able to control about 316 units across Virginia, Georgia. He's got about $20 million of assets under management. He's the host of the Lessons in Real Estate Show podcast. And, he's got a bachelor's of science in aerospace engineering from the United States Naval Academy. So he's an amazing guest. I think you're going to learn a ton from him. Just real practical, tactical information. I know that he's going to share with us, like, how in the world does somebody invest in real estate, multifamily syndication, $20 million worth of it, while, serving full-time in the military. And probably some of those hours are literally in a submarine, I would imagine. But man, let me turn it over to you. Anthony, thank you very much. And tell us a little bit about, yourself, who you are and what you do. And we'll just start a great conversation here.
Yeah, sure. Of course. This great intro, a lot of great bullet points there, and it makes you sound a lot better than I actually am. So I'll try to fill in all the details there. So I'm a submarine officer stationed out in Japan here. I'm stationed at a base that's a couple hours south of Tokyo. And it sounds like what's been going on in the States for the past year. It's probably a safer place to be with everything that's happened in 2020. But no, I've enjoyed being here. We've been here for the past year, and we'll be here for another couple years or so. Before that, I was in Norfolk for about 4 years on a couple submarines out there, the USS Albany and the USS San Francisco. Majority of my time was in the shipyard at Norfolk Naval Shipyard there, but did get some sea time, did some cool stuff down in the Bahamas for a little bit. For when I got off of my first sea tour at the end of 2018, I knew that the Navy wasn't gonna be my career. I wasn't gonna spend at that point the next 15 years of my life until retirement. And so I just started looking for other avenues to be able to supplement my income and move into another career. And one thing I stumbled upon was real estate investing. And I like to say that I really started real estate investing in 2016, but that was by accident that I was a real estate investor, did an accidental house hack, didn't know what I was doing, just bought a house and happened to have a roommate. But digging a little bit more into that, I started doing a lot of reading in 2018 when we were underway. Read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, of course, quintessential book. And then I also read Set for Life by Scott Trench. And in that book, he talks a lot about, minimizing your expenses and utilizing house hacking as a method to, start investing in real estate. And so I fell in love with this idea of house hacking a multifamily property. And so I got off of my submarine the day before Thanksgiving, and I told my wife, hey, we're going to move from our our 2,000 square foot, fenced in yard house with 4 bedrooms to a quad where we're going to be in a studio apartment that was less than half the size of the previous place. And as you can imagine, that conversation didn't go particularly well with the wife, but she came around to it, and it's funny looking back on it now. She didn't really know a lot about real estate investing. Didn't think that we are going to do particularly well in it, and now she brags a lot about it to her friends when we we're at family parties and stuff like that. So
she made the wise choice, man.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it was, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit. I think for anyone getting started, particularly for me, the hardest thing was getting my spouse on board. And, coming from an engineering background and a submarine background and nuclear power and all of that, I was very much about the numbers and the Excel spreadsheets, and I'm like, boom, 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 this house is going to get us this much money, and we're going to, this is how much it's going to cash flow. This is how much our mortgage is going to, be, and figuring out all the numbers and setting aside reserves and all of that. And I remember when I first started talking to my wife about this property, I used Bigger Pockets calculator and did all the, the spreadsheets and all the graphs and the pie charts and all the pretty colors. And I showed her, like, babe, look at this. Look how much money we're going to be able to make off of this property. And, showing her all the numbers, and it's like, oh, this is totally going to make sense. And she was like, having none of it. And, it made me realize that the way that we approach things with our spouses in general, and that could be really any partner, whether it's another business partner or not, you really have to understand what that person values and, what is going on in their head. And for me, it was all about the numbers and the chasing the money and building this, this large empire and real estate. And for her, it was more about security. Like, okay, are we going to go bankrupt going after these properties? Like, are we going to have any money to, to get groceries and stuff like that? And, for a time it was rough. For a couple months there, we had 3 mortgages on properties that were completely empty. And, we blew through our savings, and luckily, everything it worked itself out. But, that is something that's huge when you're first getting started, is you really need to get your spouse on board. You really need to get your spouse on board, or it's just going to be a wedge that gets driven between you two. And, luckily with enough time and enough, examples and proof, my wife kind of came around to the idea. But yeah, it was not easy going to start with, for sure.
Yeah. I've talked to a number of guests, and that's one of my questions, because I've had it easy in this perspective, where my wife was always on board since we were younger. Our first house, we did it, 12 years of single family. So we bought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And she was always on board. But I talked to a number of guests that just didn't have it so lucky. So the question I always ask is, how did you make that work, right? And so it sounds like you kind of found out, hey, it was about security. So how did you make that work? How did that happen?
Yeah, and I think that's a good example you bring up, because, when you're talking a single family home, it's a much smaller mortgage. The damage is much smaller if you're not able to pay for it, versus a multi-million-dollar property when your mortgage is due and it's 2, 3, 4 grand. And you're trying to come up with that all yourself because your property is completely vacant. Now you're kind of talking a different story. And, the risk goes up with that. The anxiety goes up with that. But it really just comes down to, are they educated? One, are they educated enough about it? And how do you go about, prompting them to, understand what you're trying to talk about here? Because, I can throw around real estate terms all day and my wife kind of her eyes glaze over. But that's not what she's about. She's about, okay, I trust you to make sure that we're going the right way on this, and, let me help however I can. Yeah. And so I think that kind of that understanding between the two of us, and having her, help out here and there, really made the difference. And, I'm not asking her to, to go walk properties with me or do due diligence or, do investor emails and stuff like that. But I think getting your spouse involved until they understand enough of what's going on, and they can, trust you and trust the process, I think is big.
Yeah.
And Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree, 100%. You made me think about our first single family property, which is the one we were living in, but within my budget that I was trying to spend,
Hmm.
I had to walk like 30 something properties, and before I pulled the trigger, and after the first or second, she was like, "I'm not going to go to anymore." So I had to go to 28, and then we finally, and I knew, okay, this is what she's looking for. So at the very end, we're like, "Hey, it's kind of down to these two." She was involved in those major decision, but like I kind of weeded out 28, different properties or whatever.
Right.
And that helped a lot. Now with multifamily, it's a different game, as exactly as you're mentioning. So the different paradigm, different shift. How are you guys with now signing on the loans for millions of dollars of properties? How did that go over?
Yeah. When I get in these, so I guess that's a good transition into getting the syndications in larger multifamily. So, the past few deals that we've been doing, really all in 2020, have been all syndications. And so, having pretty much no net worth or portfolio to start with, I wasn't typically the one that signed on the loans. We typically had someone else who came in and signed for all that. But she understands that multifamily. Is a relatively stable asset class. Everyone's going to need housing. Everyone needs housing to survive, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're not buying, a property that isn't able to cash flow for you, as long as you're prescribing yourself to buying a cash flowing property rather than buying for appreciation or anything like that, your risk is relatively minuscule, if you will.
Yeah,
So
one person leaves, you're not having to fork over the mortgage payment on a single family house. The fear
right,
that you had and the situation that you found yourself in single family. So one person leaves, you're like, oh man,
right,
we'll get it filled up. There's 90 other renters here, right? So yeah,
right.
yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, exactly. So that really helped. And really, she's just kind of taken a step back from the whole process as well. We talk money a lot too. Like we do a biweekly money budgeting talk, and we move stuff around and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, yeah, she's pretty hands off from the rest of it. But I wanted her to be involved as much as possible because at the end of the day, it's a family business, right? If I put $50,000 into a property and I lose that $50,000, that's both of us losing it.
Yeah.
Just as well as if we gain $50,000, that we're both winning.
Mm-hmm.
So I just let her be involved as much as she wants to be involved. I'll just say that.
As much as she wants to be involved. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, man. Well, you mentioned a couple things that I want to make sure we hit on. Right, you're in the Navy. You realize, hey, I'm not going to be here for the next 15 or 20 years, and you've got to figure out a way to kind of make it happen. So a lot of us have read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I've never heard Set for Life. Scott Trench. What was it? Maybe summarize a couple of those points, and then talk about the move to multifamily for you. Maybe we'll use that as a jumping point. But
Sure, sure. Yeah, so the book's Set for Life by Scott Trench. He's now the CEO of Bigger Pockets. I think he was just a podcast host, or I
nice.
don't know what he was back then, back in 2018. But now he's the CEO of Bigger Pockets. So the book just talks a lot about, it's more common sense stuff. Like, hey, like if you want to have money to invest, you need to save money, right? So like going out every night, eating takeout all the time, going clubbing, spending more money than you're getting in, just kind of common sense stuff like that. But one thing he did touch on was the house hacking aspect, and essentially buying a house, living in it, and having, other, if you have a single family home, renting out your other rooms, or a multifamily property like a triplex or a quad, renting out the other apartments. So, when we bought that quad, that's exactly what we did. We lived essentially for free. Our mortgage was completely paid for by our other three tenants, and we actually did an Airbnb in one of the units as well, which was great. Saved up a lot of money doing it that way, and it's definitely a good way to get into the game. And kind of get your feet wet with property management, dealing with leases, running a property, things like that. because, whether you're in the military, have access to your VA loan, or you are a civilian and you have access to, owner occupied loan like the FHA, it's pretty low down payments. And if you're willing to live in that property for, at least a year or more, then it's a pretty good option. Now that is not always the case for people who have kids or whose spouses don't want to do that, or whatever the situation is for you. But if you're able to work it with your family situation and your work situation and all the kind of life dynamics, and it's definitely a good way to get into the game. So that's what we did. So 2018, beginning of 2019, closed on a quad, and moved into that and lived in that for about a year before we came out here. Learned a lot on that property. Did a lot of renovations ourselves. It was, it was a 120-year-old property, and wow. It was an old mansion in Old Town Portsmouth that was converted into a quadplex. Super unique characteristics to this property. I mean, you could definitely tell where a lot of the old accents were just covered up, like the wooden floors. The banister railing had like very unique kind of floral print and stuff. So it was cool, a cool property. But yeah, so lived there for about a year. And about a month after we bought that property, we bought a triplex with a couple other Navy guys in a joint venture. And so that February was the time when we had 3 mortgages with no one living in any of the properties except for us. And luckily, right after that, we started having a lot of tenants coming in. So bought that with a joint venture. And then, I was just thinking to myself, I can go along and do these small multifamily here and there, triplex, quad, and eventually get up to 100 units. Or I can just go straight for a large multifamily and, do a syndication and, bring in other investors to help fund the property itself. So I started doing a lot more research into larger apartment buildings and commercial real estate investing. Got into some courses and really started doing a lot of research and talking to brokers and, evaluating deals and due diligence. And I had a property in Kansas City, which is where I'm from originally, that I had under contract. And, looking back on it now, I feel like an idiot, but it was a good learning experience because I had no one else involved in it except for me. I didn't have the net worth requirements. I didn't have any, investors involved. I didn't even have anybody boots on the ground, but, me being young and gung ho, I'm going to go do this. Got this property under contract, and luckily, thankfully, I only lost about $5,000 on that. And we backed out right before due diligence ended because it was viewing the property. It was a mess. It was a mess of a property.
It was not the right property. And you found that out quickly. Right. Losing $5,000 and some time, effort, energy, far better than losing, tens of thousands, if not hundreds, or, in the wrong property. And it kind of illuminated as what it sounded like the need for, I should be partnering up with, some other people that kind of help. So that was an awesome, experience. Sorry to cut you off. I'm just kind of thinking about this stuff, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I had some good advice given to me a few months ago is that the best deal is often one we don't do. Mm-hmm. And, I think about that a lot when I think about these properties that we look at. They're like, oh man, I could totally go for this property, but it's way overpriced. And I'm like, well, it's not worth it. The market's not right. The property's just not worth what it's going for. And I just think about that. I think about that, the best property is the one that you don't buy. So, just like you said, realized that I couldn't do this by myself, and also realizing that I was going to be going to Japan in the few months after that. Mm-hmm, I started going to a lot more conferences and talking with people and networking and building up these partnerships, across the country, and in Kansas City and Hampton Roads, stuff like that.
Sorry to cut you off. What conferences did you go to? Maybe just kind of talk a little bit about that whole process would be awesome too. How many did you go to and what'd you do there, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So the very first one I went to was Dealmaker Live in Dallas. That was July of 19. and that's Michael Blanc's
Michael
event.
Blanc.
Yeah, tremendous. I mean, it validated everything I was doing. And I felt like I wasn't, I didn't feel like I was on the right track before I went there, but I went and I got to meet like rock stars in the real estate realm. Guys like Vinny Chopra and Joe Fairless and Matt Faircloth and Michael himself. Just seeing these celebrities who have made them, have made a huge impact on me as a beginning investor, but also just had this huge, big presence and proof of concept. So I flourished. I loved being there. And a lot of these conferences pretty much follow the same kind of format. You go and you listen to speakers talk about something, a number of different topics. Some of them are geared towards like teaching you specifically, like went to Rod Khleif's. His is him teaching you, the basics, mindset, stuff like that. But some other ones are more about having guest speakers come in and talk about, okay, the state of the market, what's going on with multifamily, what's going on with different markets. Hearing Neil Bawa talk about, data-driven kind of solutions and market data from a big brain kind of perspective. So that was Dealmaker Live, and met a lot of awesome people there. Met a lot of guys that, I'm still in contact with, and we're growing up together, if you will, in our careers. So
is that where you
was,
met your partners that you're doing deals with today?
Yes and no. So that's actually probably a good transition. So towards the end of 2019, I realized, I was going to be leaving. So I started my podcast, and one of the first guest I had on is now my current business partner. And we've known each other for the past, at that point, about a year. He was the very first guy I knew that was investing in apartment buildings. And I thought he was like crazy. It's like, how do you do that? And so his name's Phil, and we were local together. So we would run into each other. Actually, at every single conference we went to, we saw each other there. The local ones, the ones up and down the East Coast, Dealmaker Live. So we knew of each other, and we would see each other, at local REI meetups and stuff. But we never really thought about partnering until I had the interview with him. And after the interview, it's like, hey, I got this apartment that was literally 10 minutes away from where I lived at the time. It's like, hey, you want to come in and help, do capital raising on this, investor relations, operations kind of stuff, and get your feet wet. So I was like, sure. He was a veteran, I was obviously active duty. So we kind of had that connection there. And so he brought me in on that deal. It was our first large deal, 104 units, and raised about $800,000 personally for that one. And ever since been helping out with some of the investor relations side, asset management, and kind of just doing whatever needs to be done for that property. But closed on that one in March. Right after that one, a couple months after that one, some of the other general partners on that deal brought me in on 112 unit in Savannah. So we closed on that one in September and raised about 800,000 for that one. And then a couple months after that, we closed on a 92 unit in Hampton, which is in the Hampton Roads area. And that was the end of October that we closed on that one. So still kind of in the fresh stages of turning that one over. So, in the matter of 2020, I've gone from starting at 8 units at the beginning of the year to 316 in the matter of 12 months, which is well overseas, which is crazy to me to think. During COVID times as well, and I think it's a testament to the risk you're willing to take and the partnerships you're willing to build. And, it takes a lot of trust and faith in, and partners being overseas. There's guys that, will not invest in the next state over, much less invest from overseas. So, I think a lot of people, particularly when they're out of state, think like, I can't do that. I don't have the time or the money or the energy, or I'm not in that state. I don't have the knowledge, whatever the limiting belief is, and it just stops them from taking action, or it stops them from really doing anything. And, I really enjoy real estate. I really enjoy the thrill of finding properties and doing due diligence and talking with investors about it. I just really enjoy it.
It's
And
awesome, isn't it? It's like,
yeah,
it's so fun. If you love that aspect of it, like you're gonna have an amazing run in multifamily real estate or
yeah,
syndication or commercial real estate, or frankly even single family investing if that's what you want to go do. If you're
right.
excited and like lit up about it, and I'm just listening to everything and taking everything you said in, Anthony, and I'm so excited for you, my friend, because it's that kind of fire and you kind of working through the initial obstacles and recognizing all the stuff, man. I'm excited for their future, brother. So sorry to cut you off. I get excited. Go ahead.
No, you're good. We talked about this beforehand. I'll just get on a rant and just keep talking and talking. So if you need to stop me, just let me know.
No, man,
Uh,
I love your story so far, and I'm excited for you.
yeah,
So yeah.
appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster of a ride. Every deal is no guarantee.
Mhm.
Every deal, even till the last day, until the last hour before closing, is not a guarantee. Gosh, I mean, all three deals we did this year, pretty much the last week we had something come up that had to push closing for one reason or another. Sellers not getting us the right stuff, lenders, throwing us for a loop, capital coming in at the last second that we were trying to raise, and it's one of the things that I take from the military that I'm really thankful for, particularly as a submarine officer, is my ability to problem solve through issues that we have. And I think that's a, a, a paramount thing for a successful real estate investor is being able to problem solve. And that's really what we get paid for, is being able to solve problems. It's not to find properties and find investors and all of that. It's to see a problem and find a solution for it, no matter what you have to do for it.
I
Um,
agree. I agree
yeah.
100%. Let me pause you here
Yeah.
because the problem and solution is exactly what, like you said, the operators or syndicators or general partners or principals, co-sponsors, whatever word you want to put into it, the people leading the deal. That's essentially what we are doing the deal for. So limited partner passive investors can just have this really great experience of just getting on. I've heard it described as getting on a flight or getting on a plane, and this is your cruise. You paid for the ticket. Just hand me the drink and I'm ready to have a snack. You guys go run the show and make sure that I arrive safely. I want to
Right.
travel from here to there. And sometimes turbulence comes up or, climate, the weather changes and the crew has to make some different decisions, right? And
Yeah.
that's what they get paid to do. And if
Right.
we can have that mindset as good active partners and operator syndicators, you're going to do really well, especially if you can problem solve.
Hello, hello. You're listening to the Five Talents Podcast. I'm your host, Abel Pacheco. If you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you're serious about achieving financial freedom. Are you ready to create your own path through multifamily investing for yourself and your family? Then I know you're going to appreciate our Investor's Guide to Multifamily Investing. It's titled Tackling Commercial Real Estate the Easy Way. We use this guide to invest ourselves in $93 million worth of real estate. So we're going to show you the basic mechanics of multifamily syndications and how to evaluate your next passive investment opportunity. So the best part, if you've subscribed to our podcast now, leave us a review and a rating. I'm going to give you a free copy of our ebook. So please take a moment to do that now. Once you've done that, go to 5tcre.com/ebook, 5tcre.com/ebook. Make sure to let us know you left a review and we're going to send you a free copy. So thank you so much for subscribing to the Five Talents Podcast. We really appreciate it.
So,
Right.
let's dig into these, few problems, right? So a couple types of listeners I would say that we want to summarize for in the next couple of minutes because really good. General partners are problem solving and passive investors are trying to get over this mental hurdle of giving someone else my money, which I think you've described pretty appropriately. Like you're in a submarine across the freaking world. Like you've got to make that decision to, say, hey, I'm okay with taking risk. One thing you mentioned, and the second one was building relationships with people that you trust, right? So a couple things to summarize. How how did you problem solve for these three events that came up during a crazy year where you were able to manage the closing of those? Like, what were those problem solving? What did you do, and how'd you do it?
Well, some of them, like with the lender, I mean, there's not much really you could do besides get them what they required, and just have everyone on the understanding that, um, our the closing was going to be delayed a couple days for that. But our most recent deal we had, we ran into capital raising issues with the property that we're having, and we brought in some kind of key guys to help with that regard that we had worked with before. But we were like, I don't know, like $250,000 off. And we had enough to close, but we wanted to make sure that we had enough for reserves and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we just had to, do some, private lending, if you will, to kind of get us over that hurdle. And so it's that kind of creative thought process, like, okay, this guy may not be interested in having his money, held up for 3 to 5 years, but he may be interested in doing kind of a quick turnaround loan. And in the meantime, that gives us a little more runway to go find some additional investors to come and invest in that. Right.
Yeah. Do so kind of like a note on the side, X% interest, X% of time, personal guarantee, whatever it was. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. I like that.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like, hey, they're going to take full control of the property. Right. It's, if you know enough people and you can trust the individuals that you're working with, mm-hmm. And you have a plan moving forward to get their money back in a certain amount of time, then, I say go for it and make it work. So, at the end of the day, it's not worth, losing out on the deal and potentially getting sued for defaulting or having to, lose your EMD and all of that, when you can try to solve that problem. And, even before that, we were having issues with the seller just not signing. So the property we were working with that seller to get under contract for about 8 months, pretty much since the beginning of the year before mm-hmm. we actually got under contract. So got her under contract in like August and closed in October. And it was just pulling teeth the whole way, dealing with an unsophisticated seller, dealing with not a commercial real estate broker that was representing him, but a residential real estate agent was representing him. Just didn't understand how the process worked with commercial real estate versus, residential real estate. Didn't understand why he had to provide all of these, all the financials and rent rolls and even the rent rolls were just like garbage. It was like a unit and how much they're paying in rent, monthly rent. That was it. Like that was literally the rent roll, like no names, no lease ends or starts, nothing like that. So it was actually one of the things I commented on when my partner and I first looked at this is like, these financials are garbage. Like, I don't even know how you evaluate this property. Like it's so mismanaged. And that was actually one of the issues we had to work through as well. It was so mismanaged that we went to multiple banks and they wouldn't lend on it because the books were so bad. Yeah. It wasn't an occupancy issue. It wasn't the property, had like a crime issue or anything like that. It was just that the books were so bad and like almost like unusable that we had to work with the seller for multiple months to get them in an order that the lenders could actually use.
Yeah. Let me pause you here too, because so for the passive investors that are listening or the general, like I said, new general partners, a couple things that Anthony mentioned is like, hey, we're trying to raise capital. You're a little short. You're getting a note on the side to kind of fill your bucket. One thing you don't want to do, and I think you mentioned it, EMD was the letter. So earnest money deposit, a couple $100,000 or whatever the amount is that you put down. You've got a lot of hard money. We call it hard money. It's different than single family hard money. It's money's gone hard. You're literally going to lose a bit of it. And that could be the loan application with the lender, 15 to 20 grand or more. And then you're paying for the appraisals, the PCA, property condition assessments, the appraisals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All that money is hard, meaning if we don't close, we lose out. the sponsors and operators, syndicators, that's the risk there. And so, when Anthony mentions earlier, hey, the risk, what risk are you willing to get into? Those are some of the risks that you're going to have to be willing to get into as a general partner. The limited partner money, you are not putting that money into the hard earnest money or hard money. You're trying to do that on your own because you can't risk their capital the same way. And so that's one thing, right? Just to kind of summarize that, and that the next part, where the second obstacle that I heard was those financials, because on a commercial loan, they're going to look at a trailing 12. It's your profit and loss, your financial statements, and a solid financial statement or trailing 12 will have, here is the true, books of what's actually happening, because the banks, they don't value the properties in the same way that single family does, by the neighbor, or, the property, assessment, tax records only, or whatever. It is like, what are your financials? How much net operating income did you make? How much are the expenses? Show me the actuals, and we'll tell you how much we're willing to lend on this thing. So when your books are bad, as a general partner, keep this in mind, it's super hard to sell your property. You better make sure your books are in order, so it's easier to sell, or easier for somebody to analyze your deal that you're trying to exit. And on the other side, I bet you those books being in a disarray were probably some of the reasons that you got a good deal on this property, is my guess, because nobody wanted to do a lot of the things that you did, that hard obstacle challenge that you worked through, the problem solving. That's probably why you closed at a pretty sweet price, is my guess.
Yeah, that was a lot of it. And the fact that it was unsophisticated. So like when I say residential real estate agent, they listed it on the MLS.
Yeah.
Like
How much was
$6 million property on the MLS, 92 units,
I love
so
it. I love it.
Just right off the bat, you could just smell that this was just it was a long haul, and it was a drag, but finally got it done, and now we're closed on it and the real work's begun.
Yep.
But one thing that my partner and I really thought about over these past few syndications that we've done is that a lot of the investors that I brought in specifically, or wanted to invest with me, were military investors. And just due to the nature of how much money we're getting paid, and the fact that a lot of our income is actually not taxed, so it's not actually shown on a W-2, there's very few military investors who are actually accredited individuals or accredited investors. And so, even on the deals that we did, which all three of those deals we did 506Bs, which means that we could bring up to 35 non-accredited investors in, or sophisticated investors, if you will. Even those deals, you're limited in how many military investors you can bring in. And, I just felt like it was a disservice to a lot of guys who, were in the same place as me, but maybe just didn't have enough time or money to be a general partner on these deals, but they wanted to be a limited partner, right? They wanted to throw their money into real estate. And, maybe they didn't have 50, 100, I've even seen some deals that are like $250,000 minimum to get in on some of these properties. They just don't have that money. So, what my partner and I decided, like, hey, instead of doing these syndications here and there and trying to kind of scrap money together, let's bring in our military investors in on these deals and give them an opportunity that doesn't otherwise exist. So what we did is we created a Reg A plus fund, which is different than your typical syndication fund in the form of a 506B or 506C, and that we can have an unlimited amount of accredited and non-accredited investors. So we can bring in any amount of a military investor, brothers and sisters that you want to get in on the deal. Not only that, but it's a much smaller minimum than you're typically going to see in the syndication. So our fund minimum is 5,000 versus 50,000 minimum or more that you're typically going to see. And it's run entirely by veterans, 100% veteran owned and ran. Like I said, my partner is a Navy veteran. I'm active duty as well. And, it's just made with the military investor in mind, the way that we've set up the fund, the term lengths, the minimums that we put up. We just want to give an opportunity for, our military investors to be able to actually invest in real estate and not have to have, $50,000, $100,000 to throw in and have to be accredited, Right. There's a lot of disadvantages going towards the military investor in that regard, and we're just trying to level the playing field. So,
yeah, that's awesome. So I've done Reg D 506B. I've done 506C. We've explained the Reg A little bit more for those that are kind of new to to it. I'd like some. I've heard of it. I've never done it. I'm like, what's the difference?
Sure. Yeah, so SEC regulation for raising capital under what you're just talking about there, 506B and 506C, fall under Regulation D, which is private placement memorandums and private placements. There's just some restrictions on the type of people you can have in there, how much money you can raise, advertising, things like that. You also have crowdfunding sources. So, these deals, I can't remember what the actual, I think CrowdShares is the name of the website, but it's a crowdfunding source where you can buy, a small chunk of a property for, $5-10, something like that. And it's regulated by the SEC, and it's a crowdfunding regulation. And then there's a Regulation A, which is also called a mini IPO, and it has it's much more expensive and a much longer time frame to get set up than your typical, 506B or 506C, which may take, a couple weeks to a month to actually do all the paperwork, like actual SEC paperwork for it. Not accounting for closing. But Reg A Plus Fund takes, now we're on about 6 months ongoing of getting this thing set up. Pretty expensive, multiple, actually we're about at 100,000 so far invested into this. And there's a lot more auditing requirements. It's a lot more regulation oversight by the SEC, but it gives us a lot more flexibility to publicly advertise wherever we want, bring in, like I said, any number of accredited, non-accredited investors, make up a small or large of a minimum as we want. And there's just a lot of great benefits to the Reg A Plus fund that just is beneficial not only to the investors but to us as the fund itself, Mission First Capital Fund, because instead of doing a syndication where you find the property and then you raise the capital for it, and you never know if the capital is 100% going to be there until you actually start raising it. What we're doing is we're finding the capital and then finding the properties afterwards. So, capital is being raised into this fund. It's a blind pool. So everyone who's in it gets a set preferred return, which is the key there. So preferred return is basically saying that the investors who are investing in the fund get paid first before the managers ever see anything. And, it's pretty common nowadays to see that in the syndication format, but pref rates are huge in this regard. So, the investors are getting paid before we get paid as the managers of the fund. But it's all going into a blind pool. So, for example, we have 3 different fund term lengths, if you will, and they're all based off of this idea of a retirement fund or building out a nest egg for yourself. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but we have a government/military 401k called the TSP, or the Thrift Savings Plan. And I guess it's kind of similar to what you would see with like Vanguard. There are a number of different funds. You can put in X amount of money into it. You can pull it straight out of your paycheck. But it's tied to the capital market. It's tied to what's going on with stocks. And so, when 2008 hits and it crashes, it's crashing. When, 2020 happens and coronavirus makes the stocks, extremely unpredictable, your TSP and your retirement capital is doing the same thing. So we just want to provide an alternative to that, and we call it the growth fund. And it's a 3, a 5, and an 8-year term length for a 25 or 50% or 100% return on capital over that time. And the catch is that it's not a monthly distribution; it's a set it and wait type of thing. Yeah. So it's more like a certificate of deposit or CD in that regard.
Yeah.
But it gives the guys who don't need a monthly cash flow that have this retirement income coming in and want a place to set it, to be able to put that money aside into that.
All right, man. Well, kudos to you guys and y'all's team. Investing the extra money, 100K is no joke. Normal syndication, attorney may cost 15 grand, and we pay a little bit up front. We pay a little bit through the exemptions, like in each state the investors are in, but it's not 100K. And it doesn't take us 6 months to put it together, like Anthony said. And then, but in doing so, now you can help more people at whatever dollar amounts. It doesn't have to. The reason the amounts, sometimes people ask me, why is the minimum 50K on these deals and some of the others 75? Well, in a Reg D 506B, as Anthony mentioned, you're limited to 35 non-accredited investors. So you have to, if you expect a lot of non-accredited investors, you have to make the minimum big enough to, by the math, if you had the full capacity, 35 investors, and everybody was there, you have to have enough to close so that you end up making it bigger. So, by removing that with that Reg A, I guess it gives you the ability, unlimited, and you can raise at $100 a month or $100, as often as you fund a TSP, right, to get into it once it gets going, which is pretty cool. And then the Anthony mentioned pref or preferred return. So, no such thing as a guarantee in any investment. If somebody tells you that you're running, you need to run. However, preferred return, for those that aren't, the uninitiated into the world, it's the closest you can get kind of to that quote unquote guarantee. It basically, it's a contractual agreement that says, hey, as an investor, I am going to get a preferred return of whatever percentage, and that percentage, it will get paid first. And even if they're not paying it out, like Anthony said, not distributions of cash flow, it's accruing. The dollars, the preferred returns accrue over some period of time so that they get the preferred return. But that's really cool, man. All this stuff that you mentioned. And so I appreciate you sharing with us. Well, while we're on this topic and close to the time, I don't want to cut you. I don't want to go over time. Where can our listeners, our guests, get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about what you're doing, or the fun, or if they're active duty, whatever they, resonate with anything you said? Where should they reach out?
Sure. You can reach me on Facebook, Anthony Pinto. I'm on there pretty regularly, pretty responsive. I'm on LinkedIn, although I'm not too responsive on that. So Facebook is the main way you can reach me. You can also reach me at email at anthony@missionfirstcapital.co, not .com, .co. And you can also check out our website, missionfirstcapital.co as well. And you'll see everything you need to see on there, on the fund itself, about us, how to actually get started, the investor portal we're using, all of that. So super excited about getting this fund set up, because I think it's gonna open up a whole nother market to a lot of guys in uniform and out that just don't really have a lot of opportunities to invest in quality real estate opportunities.
Right on. Well, good luck with that. And that's awesome. What, is there anything we didn't touch on today that you wanted to share, bring exposure to? Anything we didn't hit on?
Not particularly. I mean, I can give, a last minute kind of tip for those guys getting started. One of the things that it kind of blows my mind when people get started is that they think that they have to limit themselves to having a capital raise, and that's the way to get in with these big guys. And, it's not so. I mean, there's so many different jobs and tasks that go into being a general partner, investor relations, asset management, project management as well, doing the construction side of things. I mean, something as simple as you live 5 minutes away from the property and no one else does is valuable, right? Just being local to the property is valuable. So, I would just say to the guys who are trying to get started, take an assessment of what you have to offer. And that can be something as like, you can set up a website, or you're good with social media, or you're just local to the property. And they don't discredit those advantages that you have and can bring to, a partnership if you're trying to get started and you're trying to join a team that's already well established.
Highly valuable. Thank you very much, Anthony. I really appreciate your time. And again, my name is Abel Pacheco. I'm your host for the 5 Talents podcast. If you've heard something you appreciated today, please go to our podcast, subscribe to it, and leave a written review. We would appreciate it. And Anthony as well. So thank you very much for your time, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Abel. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the 5 Talents podcast with your host, myself, Abel Pacheco. Each week, we're going to bring you interviews from industry experts and commercial real estate investors who followed their dreams and achieved massive success. Before you leave, let me ask you a few questions. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you learn something valuable? Was your mind stretched to what's possible and what you can achieve? Do you want other experts just like the one you heard today? If you answered yes to any or all of those questions, then please take a moment to subscribe to the 5 Talents podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and most importantly, leave us a written review. Tell us what you liked, tell us your favorite guest, give us any feedback. I'm excited to learn and improve so you can get a more valuable show. So thank you again for subscribing to the 5 Talents podcast.